There was a lot of great wrestling in 2021, especially in WWE and AEW. And today we're going to try to make the top 5 best wrestling matches in AEW and WWE for 2021 here on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me is Ralph Valenti. Ralph, we each picked 3 matches to nominate in this top 5. We also took 4 matches that the community have nominated, and we'll try to take the best 5 from 2021. So Ralph, let's start with your list, your top 3 matches for 2021.
Yeah, so my match coming in at number 3 is a match that I think a lot of people forget about, but I think given the circumstances surrounding the match, not necessarily the story going into it, it's definitely a match that I think belongs on this list. So the match I'm talking about is Sasha Banks versus Bianca Belair. Now, I know that, in the past we had the Ronda Rousey main event where, there was a triple threat, but this is really where you had 2 individuals who were going in there and main eventing as women. And that was a big deal. And not only that, but it was Bianca Belair's really first test. Yes, she won the Royal Rumble, and that was a big deal. But for them to really go out there and deliver, that was a lot of pressure on them to go out there and do that. And I think that they certainly did it. The one moment in the match that I think I like more than anything is the fact that they got the fans to come out. It was a high spot, if you will, without doing any type of crazy dives off a ladder or flips or anything that would really sacrifice one's health. And that was the point at the end of the match where Bianca Belair actually used her ponytail to whip Sasha Banks. It made for a really cool moment. And then ultimately Bianca Belair, who is in my mind, one of the very best women professional wrestlers, or even best professional wrestlers, I should say, in the world today, her coming out moment against Sasha Banks, who has always been very good. That's my number 3 on my list. So number 2 on my list, I actually have Ilja Dragunov and Walter as number 2 on my list. Now, I could have definitely made this number 1. Again, going into this match, I think that there was a lot of pressure on this guys because their first match, I think it really took a lot of people by surprise. When you talk about pro wrestling and you consider what pro wrestling is supposed to be, and that's convince the fans that this is a real fight, there's no doubt that their first match certainly did that. The brutality of it, Walter just kicking the crap out of Ilja Dragunov ultimately to get the win at the end of it in their first match. They had a lot of pressure going into this, I think, because I think now that word was out that these two could deliver at this level, they were expected to go out there and do it again. And they certainly did that. This was just as brutal as their first match, back and forth, a lot of really good moments. Walter, in my mind, is a guy that's going to go to the main roster and have a lot of success if he's utilized correctly, which who knows if that'll actually happen, but he's great. Ilja Dragunov is a guy that for his size and stature can perform and make it believable given how rugged and how in your face his style is. So those two just have great chemistry. This match was great. Ilja Dragunov ultimately getting the win was that feel-good moment that I think a lot of times you want in pro wrestling, and you got it here. And then my number 1 match of the year, I got to go with Bryan Danielson and Hangman Page. This match itself, in my mind, is the best match because, one, they went an hour, which in today's age is almost unheard of, especially when you consider it was a television match. It wasn't a pay-per-view match. They had to go through commercials. Nobody expected them to truly go an hour, but I think the biggest part of this was just how good each one of them did in their own role. So Bryan Danielson, going back about a month ago, he was probably the most over face in AEW, and right now he may be the biggest heel in all of AEW, or maybe even one of the top heels in pro wrestling. The way that he was carrying himself throughout the match, the way he'd play to the fans, the way he'd duck out of the ring to try and get Hangman Page off of him, all the little chicken shit heel things that guys do, the jumping jacks just to annoy people. That was great. Building up to the point where ultimately I know it was a draw, and I know that's disappointing to some people, but I think that's really going to set the stage for their next match, which was announced on Dynamite this past week. I liked all of the technicalities in this match. Of course, I think I got throwbacks and callbacks to, like Shawn and Bret Hart in their Iron Man match, which was also an hour and some change because of the overtime. It wasn't like they were just relying on crazy high spots to get the fans to come up. The fans were invested throughout the entire time, and a lot of good technical back and forth pro wrestling, which you wouldn't expect, or which you would expect from 2 of the very best in pro wrestling right now. So that's my match of the year. I got Bryan Danielson and Hangman Page.
I know a lot of people talk about Bryan Danielson versus Hangman Page as the match of the year, but I think the Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson match at Grand Slam was slightly better. I think part of the reason is, one, I think going into it, you still did not know it was going to go to a time limit draw. Whereas this match with Danielson and Hangman, as soon as it got through the first commercial break, I think most people believed it was going to a time limit draw. Personally, I felt that way, and I think it kind of tuned me out of it for a good chunk of it until the finish. Did Kenny go over? Was Danielson going to beat him in the Eliminator match? But they still made it a time limit draw in 30 minutes, and I think what they did in 30, they did better than what Hangman and Danielson did in 60 minutes, and that's my number 3 match of the year. Number 2 match of the year, I think, is going to go down with the likes of Bret Hart versus Owen Hart and Triple H versus Daniel Bryan as one of the best opening matches ever to a pay-per-view, and that is MJF versus Darby Allin. You really got everything from this match. They had a good story leading into Full Gear. Who's the top pillar in AEW? Can Darby Allin mentally break MJF and vice versa? Is Darby Allin just a guy that is just stunts and high spots? And is MJF going to win with the takeover headlock move that, you know, he says he could beat people with? And there was a lot of emotion in this, a lot of chain wrestling in this. You got some high spots, you got some technicality in it, and the drama in it was so damn good that as soon as I finished watching this, I was like, damn, this is definitely a match of the year contender, maybe even the best match. I know a lot of people would probably agree with me on this as one of the best matches of the year, but I think the match of the year is Walter versus Ilja Dragunov. A lot of the reasons that you pointed out. I think the whole dynamic of David versus Goliath, but it's a sense of realism to it, given that Dragunov has the storied past. If you followed NXT UK at all in 2020 and into 2021, building up to this match, you know that Ilja Dragunov was coming into this wondering, is he going to mentally break? Did he mentally break because of the first match with Walter? And to me, Walter is the best wrestler in the world. He's better than Omega. He's better than Danielson. He's better than whoever you want to throw out there. And if you want to disagree with me on that, let me know in the comments, because I'm sure people will disagree with me on that. But Walter is the best wrestler in the world. You put him with a big man, he could deliver. You put him with a small guy, he could deliver. And this match truly shows why he is so damn good. And he doesn't rely on high spots. He just could slap the shit out of anybody, and you saw that with Dragunov. And I think the finish and letting Dragunov win was pretty emotional. I think anybody that was behind Dragunov that night, including the fans there, were probably borderline emotional after Dragunov won. So I think from that aspect too, that has to be the best match of the year. And I think that's the only one that we agree on in our top 3. But I do want to list some other honorable mentions from the community page on our YouTube channel. And if you subscribe to our channel, you see all our community posts. We try to post daily on there. So definitely subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. But I got 2 from WWE and 2 from AEW. From there, we'll make our Master 5, Ralph. First one, the other main event of WrestleMania, which was Roman Reigns versus Edge versus Daniel Bryan, which happened to be Daniel Bryan's last main event in WWE right now for WWE history, but he may go back, who knows. The other one, Seth Rollins versus Edge, Hell in a Cell at Crown Jewel, which, you know, if you actually got people to like a match in Saudi Arabia, a show that people boycott, that's got to be a pretty damn good match. For AEW, the 2 matches that a lot of people talked about outside the ones we talked about, Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa, their lights out match at the St. Patrick's Day show on Dynamite, and also at All Out, the cage match between the Lucha Brothers and the Young Bucks for the AEW Tag Team Championships. So with that, Ralph, let's break it down. Let's try to get the 5 best matches of 2021. Obviously, we agree on Walter and Dragunov, so that's going to make the list. Are there any that you agree with my other 2 that should be in the top 5 or from the honorable mentions?
Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega is up there.
Yep.
That's certainly probably, if I was to do like a top 5 or a top 10, it would be within both of those. I did like Seth Rollins and Edge in the Hell in a Cell. I thought that was good. Penta and Young Bucks, while it's good and it had its moments, sometimes I feel like both those guys, their pay-per-view matches tend to go pretty damn long.
See, I think with that one, though, I think the timing wasn't too long. It didn't overstay its welcome. And yes, there were a lot of high spots in that match, but I felt like the spots made sense in the ring. And I think the psychology and the storytelling was really good between these two, which sometimes you get lost with Young Bucks and Lucha Brother matches where it's just high spot going 100 miles an hour where there's really no psychology to it. But I definitely think this match had that. I think the fans being behind the Lucha Brothers and getting the big win, I think it kind of needs to be in that conversation, but we can hold off on that. But I will definitely put Kenny and Danielson on there. I will definitely put Walter and Dragunov. I think the triple threat at WrestleMania needs to be on this list. I think that was a really good match. And going into it, you did not know if Roman was going to retain or if Edge was going to win or if Daniel Bryan was going to win. And even during the match, they kept you wondering who the hell is going to win this match. And they had so many good false finishes, so many good, submission moves with Bryan and Edge going on Roman. And I think the finish of the double pin on Edge and Bryan really solidified Roman Reigns as how dominant he is, even though he needs help from the Usos a lot. But I definitely think that one needs to be in the discussion. I'll throw Bianca and Sasha for the importance of it. But I think if we throw Bianca and Sasha, we kind of have to throw Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa for the same reasons.
Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa, it was a good entertaining match, but at the same time, to me, sometimes like if we look at the list that we're kind of comparing, you have all of these matches that are really up there in terms of their physicality and technicality and stuff like that. And while this match was good and entertaining, are people saying that it was good and entertaining because it was a really good match or because it was the theatrics surrounding it? Obviously everybody talks about Britt Baker going into the thumbtacks and the moment afterwards where she was bleeding, which is now on a t-shirt. And that's great. It was a good, entertaining match. But to me, I always think it's more difficult to go out there and do what like Hangman Page and Bryan Danielson did to go and wrestle a technical matchup for an hour, or like Ilja Dragunov and Walter, or any of the other matches that we have listed here. So I don't think it should be in the top 5. I think you could certainly put it in the top 10 because it was entertaining and it delivered. But the fact that it was a hardcore match, if you want to call it that,
it was a lights out match.
Okay. So hardcore, lights out, whatever you want to call it. To me, if you're going to start involving blood and thumbtacks and all that stuff, of course the fans are going to react either positively or negatively, or they're going to have a reaction to it because it's not natural to see somebody, especially somebody like Britt Baker, get slammed into thumbtacks. And, it was a good match, but I don't think it belongs in the top 5.
Okay.
Because of those reasons.
All right. So we at least agree on Walter and Dragunov, and we agree on Kenny and Danielson. Those two are definitely going to make the top 5, correct?
Yeah, I would think so. You don't think Bryan Danielson and Hangman Page belongs in the top 5?
I don't think so, because I think they only made it 60 minutes to make it 60 minutes. To me, just because it went 60 minutes does not make it a good match. It was a really good match, don't get me wrong, but I feel like there were times in there where I was tuned out because I knew it was going 60 minutes. And as soon as I tune out of a match, I'm sorry, I can't put that into the best matches of the year, especially when another match that I think was a match of the year contender was only 11 minutes, and that's CM Punk versus Eddie Kingston. So if an 11-minute match I could put on the list, which I didn't even nominate and I'm not going to nominate, but if an 11-minute match was a good match and should be a match of the year contender, it's hard for me to say a 60-minute match that I felt like maybe was a little bit too long was better. I don't think it should make the top 5.
Yeah, I think that your perception of that match is definitely different than mine, because I did not feel like I was tuned out, but that's mostly because of what I prefer in a pro wrestling match and stuff like that. But one match that you did mention that is shorter than this match on your list that I do think should belong in the top 5 is MJF and Darby. So I would definitely put that in the top 5.
So that's 3. We got MJF and Darby, Kenny and Danielson, Walter and Dragunov. I think for the importance of it, I will put Bianca and Sasha on there. So that's going to be 4. We still have Seth and Edge, Hell in a Cell. We have the Young Bucks and the Lucha Brothers, Steel Cage at All Out, Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa Lights Out match. And we have Danielson and Hangman, and that is it. So out of those, which do you think was obviously you think Danielson and Hangman is the best one, as that's your number 1 of the year.
Yeah.
But is there any other one that you could put on this list outside of that match?
Outside of that match, I think Seth and Edge definitely had a really good match.
Mm-hmm.
That might belong in the top 5.
Considering it was a payoff to the feud, and they had some really good matches. Their match at SummerSlam was really good. The episode of SmackDown where they went like 45 minutes, close to, at Madison Square Garden, that was a really good match. And this Hell in a Cell was a really good payoff, and it fit the storyline. Unlike typical Hell in a Cell matches today where, oh, it's Hell in a Cell. We got to make 3 random Hell in a Cell matches. This actually fit the storyline and really was a good payoff to their story. Roman, Edge, and Bryan, I kind of feel like I go back to that one. I feel like Roman Reigns needs to somehow be on this list because he's, as much as people don't want to admit it, he's had a great string of matches this year in WWE ever since he came back. It's hard to not put him on this list.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think the one thing you pointed out where it gets a little hard to kind of include his matches in the top 5 or best matches of the year is just because there's always some sort of outside interference. That being said, this match was very good, and it was the second night of WrestleMania, which, to go out there and perform on a stage like that at a WrestleMania, there's a lot of pressure because even with Roman, we've seen him crap the bed when he's been in that same situation, whether it was with Brock or whether it was Undertaker. In this match, that wasn't the case. This was a really good match. So that could be in the top 5. I think, when you're comparing the two companies. So
we narrowed it down to 2, Roman, Edge, and Bryan Danielson versus Hangman. I think those are the 2. Personally, you really could go either way. I think a lot of people probably would choose Danielson versus Hangman, partially because of recency bias, but the fact that it did go 60 minutes. And for the most part, they did keep your attention and you had the suspense of disbelief. As much as I personally don't think it was a top 5 match, I think I'll put it in the top 5 for you.
I mean, I know you may not agree with it being as long as it needed to be, but again, my perception might be a little different. I just feel like that match to go out there and perform for an hour to the point where the fans were still invested and not tuning out. There's not very many matches you're going to get, even in AEW, where they're going to say, hey, because we've seen it. We've seen it with Kenny Omega matches. We've seen it certainly with Young Buck matches where it's just like high spot, high spot, high spot. Fans are burnt out the last literally 15 minutes of a match, which in a pro wrestling match is a long time.
Yeah.
Fans are just not invested. And I felt like even with this, the live crowd was so into it. And I think that when we look back on this match historically, it's going to have a lot of significance because when you look at Adam Hangman Page, him being the first champion, if you want to call it that doesn't necessarily have the biggest reputation before AEW. Like, yeah, he was popular and people knew who he was, but he certainly wasn't the Kenny Omega going out there and having the matches with Okada. He doesn't have the history like a Chris Jericho does, or a guy like Moxley having worked in WWE and been in the Shield. So this is really their first guy that they're giving an opportunity to. And I think that, week in and week out, whether it's on the mic or even in a match like this, in a big situation, he did his part. And obviously Bryan Danielson did his part. And I just feel like it was a really good match.
All right. So our 5 in no particular order is Bryan Danielson versus Hangman Page, Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks, MJF versus Darby Allin, Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson, and Walter versus Ilja Dragunov. I'm sure you are going to disagree with this, so make your top 5 in the comments below. And we also did a top 5 recently of the 5 most underutilized wrestlers in AEW. Click the thumbnail on the screen right now, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psychobabble.